Order 66 was supposed to be swift, ruthless, the end of the Jedi in one single, decisive strike. But what if it wasn't? What if some clones hesitated? What if instead of blindly following Palpatine, they questioned the very order they were bred to obey?
Commander Kleeve.
The time has come. Execute Order 66.
Yes, my lord.
This is the story of what might have happened if the Grand Army of the Republic had turned on itself. It begins with a spark. Palpatine's voice echoed through the holofeed. Execute Order 66. Across the stars, clone commanders paused. Their programming surged to the front of their minds. For many, it was instinct. Pull the trigger, end the Jedi. But not all of them did. At the outskirts of Mygeeto, Commander Kleeve held his blaster to General Tyrra's back and froze. Something in his gut twisted. This Jedi had saved his life 6 times, had mourned with him when troopers died, had fought like a brother. Kleeve's finger hovered on the trigger, but it never pressed. Instead, he turned, and he ran. That one act of defiance changed everything. The moment word got out that a clone had refused to fire, the entire army began to fracture. Comm channels lit up with confusion. Some clones were hesitating, others were calling them traitors. And by nightfall, at least 5 Jedi were still alive, not because they fought their way out, but because the men pointing blasters at them never pulled the trigger. On Dantooine, Clone Commander Threx lost contact with his whole battalion. No confirmation, no report, just silence. Later, encrypted messages surfaced, short bursts of static and code. They hadn't been wiped out. They'd walked away. Saleucami was worse. Captain Yalo hesitated when the order came through. Just for a second. His squad saw it and turned on him. They called him defective. One shot him in the shoulder. Then they executed General Lon right in front of him. Yalo didn't fight back. He just crawled into the dirt and vanished into the jungle. Back on Kamino, the control chips had done their job, for the most part. But something had changed since the early days of the war. The clones had grown. They'd fought alongside their Jedi for years. They'd seen battles, made choices, formed bonds. These weren't droids. They had names, memories, opinions. And for a few of them, when that order came through, it didn't feel like protocol. It felt wrong. For some, it didn't just mess with their programming. It broke who they thought they were. Because the Jedi weren't just commanders, they were brothers, mentors, friends. And when the clones looked down the barrel at people they trusted, some of them couldn't pull the trigger. And just like that, the Grand Army of the Republic was no longer one army. It was 2. Some clones followed the order without question. Others followed but regretted it immediately. And some refused entirely. That's where the lines started to form. By the end of the week, Palpatine's clean sweep had collapsed into chaos. The Jedi were scattered, but so were the clones. The Grand Army was splintering. And from those splinters came factions. Commander Appo led the Fidelis Legion, clones who obeyed Order 66 and believed any deviation was sedition. They saw themselves as the last guardians of the Republic, now reformed under the Empire. Their armor was scorched black with crimson markings. Their motto, unity through obedience. But they weren't alone. The defectors found each other quickly. Refugees, survivors, dissidents. They called themselves the Petulant, a bitter name, first hurled at them by Imperial propaganda, then proudly reclaimed. Their symbol? The jagged remains of a broken Phase 2 helmet. Their goal? To bring down the Empire from within and restore the Republic. Some still protected Jedi fugitives. Others wanted only revenge. One of their leaders was Captain Yalo, the one who had been shot by his own squad. He re-emerged weeks later with a stolen gunship, scars across his face, and a war cry louder than his pain. He had nothing left to lose. That made him dangerous. The first open battle between clones came over the skies of Vokra. A petulant transport trying to evacuate survivors was intercepted by Fidelis gunships. The air lit up in a blue and red storm of laser fire. The wreckage rained down on both sides of the jungle. The survivors kept fighting until the last man bled out. The Republic's Grand Army was no more. In its place, 2 legions of brothers, both made from the same genetic code, both trained to protect the same people, now tearing each other apart. And as the fighting escalated, so did the silence from Kamino. The cloners had warned the Senate for years that using accelerated aging would backfire. Clones would become too autonomous, too volatile. No one listened. Now, the Prime Minister of Kamino refused all transmissions. The production lines went dark. No new reinforcements, no replacements. Just thousands of soldiers trained to win wars, now stuck in one they didn't understand. And the Jedi, the ones who survived, knew they couldn't win this alone. On the smuggler moon of Narseen, a fugitive Jedi named Kalor met with Commander Kleeve, the first defector. They didn't trust each other, but they knew something bigger was coming. Kalor had seen the archives. He knew about the chip. He had evidence. But Kleeve had something even more important: a map of Fidelis bases, troop numbers, and war plans. What started as an execution order had turned into a rebellion, and neither side was backing down. The war didn't look like the Clone Wars. It was messier, more personal. These weren't droids they were shooting at. These were brothers. Clones who had shared barracks, who had eaten together, bled together. Now, the battlefield was laced with hesitation. Every helmeted figure on the horizon brought a split-second pause. Was he with us or against us? But the war didn't slow down. If anything, it got meaner. Fidelis Command rolled out new armor marks, deep red slashes painted across the chest plate for every Jedi taken down. The more stripes you had, the more respect you got. Their most feared squad, the Dirge Unit, was made up of clones who didn't blink when Order 66 hit. No hesitation, no questions, just executions. They wore matte black armor that looked like it had been pulled from a fire, and they didn't take prisoners. Meanwhile, the petulant weren't playing by old war rules anymore. They couldn't afford to. They split into small units and went underground, set traps, hit supply lines, took over abandoned bases and made them their own. They didn't wear medals or ranks, just torn strips of Jedi robes around their arms, faded fabric that reminded them who they were fighting for. Not to win the war, to make things right. The fight came to a head at Vandal Pass, a frozen mountain stretch lined with long abandoned Republic outposts. Whoever controlled it would hold the last route to the Outer Rim. If the Fidelis took it, the petulant would be cornered. Captain Yalo led the charge, a patchwork crew of ex-troopers, tech specialists, and rogue ARC clones. They were outgunned, outnumbered. Their only walker was half alive and leaking oil. But they moved forward anyway, because this time they weren't retreating. They were drawing a line. The storm didn't let execution. His scarred face became a rallying image, plastered across walls and broadcast through smuggler satellites. Wherever his voice reached, petulant cells began rising from hiding. Outposts once thought abandoned were restaffed overnight. The war was heating again, and at the center of it all, Kamino. It had been silent for too long. Both the Empire and the Petulant had avoided it. Too risky, too sacred. But finally, in year 3 of the conflict, Kamino sent a message. Not to the Empire, not to the Jedi, to the clones. An encoded beacon activated in the deep ocean lab beneath Tipoca City. Only those with genetic clearance could access it. The message was simple. We made you, but you made yourselves. Come home. Choose your future. It wasn't a trap, it was a farewell. When the first petulant gunships arrived, they found Kamino half-submerged, flooded from rising tides and intentional self-sabotage. The Kaminoans were gone, their research archives mostly purged. But left behind was something different. A hidden wing deep below the city. Inside were chambers, hundreds of them, stasis pods, each one containing a clone that had never been activated. No serial numbers, no orders, just blank slates. Commander Kleeve and Jedi Kalor stood in silence, watching the rows. "We were their army," Kleeve whispered. "These are their apology." Kalor didn't respond. He reached out with the Force and felt no violence, no urgency in the new clones. Just silence. They made a choice. The pods were sealed permanently. The future would not be built from old blueprints. Back in the galaxy, the war was nearing its breaking point. The Fidelis, now desperate, turned to increasingly brutal tactics. Cities like Brenos and Jural Prime were glassed from orbit if suspected of harboring defectors. Clone civilians, aging veterans who had left the war early, were dragged from homes, interrogated, or executed. Whole bloodlines erased for refusing to pick a side. The Petulant responded with precision strikes, sabotage runs on Imperial factories, disabling comm satellites, and in one daring mission, commandeering a Star Destroyer. Yalo personally led the mission aboard the Vigilance, hijacking the bridge with just 8 men. They didn't kill the crew. They aired a message galaxy-wide. This ship once served the Republic. Now it serves its people. We are not enemies of the Empire. We are enemies of lies. Your brothers are still out here. We haven't forgotten you. Don't forget us. The ship was lost within days, but the message echoed. Even stormtroopers, young conscripts raised under the Empire, began to question. Some had brothers in the clone forces. Some were raised by them. They'd heard the stories, that the clones weren't monsters, that some of them had protected Jedi instead of executing them, that some had died for peace. And the galaxy started to feel splintered. Clone versus clone, Empire versus memory, faith versus function. The final stand didn't come with trumpets. It came on a quiet moon called Draxil, once a Republic fueling station, now the last known stronghold of the Fidelis. Commander Apo, scarred and gaunt, made his final transmission. There is no Republic. There is only the Order. Obey it or die. Petulant forces landed hours later. But something strange happened. Before the battle even began, clone after clone began laying down arms. Not out of defeat, but out of exhaustion. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were survivors, haunted by years of killing people who looked like them, who spoke like them, who remembered the same childhood, the same training, the same war songs. By the end of the day, only 30 shots had been fired. By the end of the week, the war was over. The galaxy didn't celebrate. There were no medals, no parades, no declarations. be with you.